Good afternoon, or good morning if you're watching us from the U.S. West Coast, from snowy Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm Ryan Kelly, Managing Editor of GEMS, and I'd like to welcome you to our first ever EMS Today live panel simulcast. So welcome both our in-person audience as well as to our online audience watching from all over the country and, in fact, all over the world. Today's panel discussion will involve key responders from recent active shooter incidents in Orlando, Dallas, and San Bernardino. We'll discuss lessons learned, response and operational protocols and procedures implemented at the incidents, revisions made since the incident, and changes or additions made to medical, trauma, and protective equipment deployment. Just a few housekeeping notes for our online audience before we get started. Chief Gamez has a presentation immediately following this webcast, and he'll be heading out a few minutes early, so don't be alarmed if he gets up and leaves about 10 minutes before we're over. The presentation is both live and interactive, so you can ask questions at any time by clicking on the Ask a Question button in the presentation window, and when we open it up to questions, if you guys just want to raise your hands, we'll have someone with a mic come over to you and allow you to ask a question. If you're running pop-up blocking software, you'll need to disable it to view the webcast. In addition, it's recommended that you close down all other applications for better performance. This webcast will be archived at gems.com/webcasts within 48 hours, so you can view it again and share it with your colleagues. I'd, of course, also like to thank our sponsor, Boundtree Medical, for supporting today's webcast, our first ever from EMS Today. Before we begin the panel discussion, I'd like to ask each panelist to introduce herself or himself and give a brief overview of the incident. We'll start with San Bernardino County Fire Department Engineer and San Bernardino City Police Department Tactical Paramedic, Ryan Starling.
Good afternoon and good morning on the West Coast. Again, my name is Ryan Starling. I'm an engineer with the San Bernardino County Fire Department, and I'm also a reserve police officer with San Bernardino City Police Department, a tactical medic. I've been a firefighter for 12 years and a tactical medic for 7 years. Bear with us because this is about an hour and a half presentation. We're going to give it to you in about 6 minutes. Just a synopsis of what's going on, so here we go. That day was a day that everybody will remember that responded to that incident. I know I'll never forget it. It changed the way we do things throughout the whole United States on active shooter response. We did a lot of things really well. We did a lot of things poorly. A synopsis of the incident: about a terrorist entered a holiday gathering, county employees. It's been changed. It's not really a holiday gathering. It was just a meeting that was going on. Most active shooter incident ends within 5 minutes, which this one did. They were in there about 4 minutes and then fled the scene. The IRC supported those that developed with disabilities. A total of 33 victims were struck with gunfire, 14 deceased, and 33 were wounded. The weapons that were used were AR style and handguns, AR-15. The terrorists left an improvised device that I'll talk about as well. It was a remote control car wired to 3 pipe bombs that was supposed to detonate inside or detonate for first responders that arrived on scene. The terrorists were later killed about 4 hours later into the incident in a gun battle that was a high-speed pursuit and gun battle that ended about a mile and a half from the actual incident where it occurred. There was 2 officers that were wounded, one initially that took a ricochet bullet from the suspects and gave himself, medical aid himself, wrapped it up and engaged in the gunfight. The other officer didn't realize he was hit until about a week later when he started having pain in his knee. It was a bullet fragment that struck his patella. So here's an overview of the incident, where the location is. You can see the building on the right, the smaller building. That was the actual incident. Suspects entered in through the rear of the building as well as we did. What they did is they showed up in a black SUV. Entered in through the rear of the building. What I believe personally is they tried to detonate the improvised device because he brought it there that morning in a county backpack. It didn't detonate, so they went to plan B and went in and started shooting. They shot 3 or 4 people outside and then went inside and started shooting all the employees that were in the room. Staffing that day, we had 10 engines on scene, all 3 personnel engines, and 2 medic trucks, all with 3 personnel, 1 battalion chief assigned to the city. We had 2 battalion chiefs assigned to the city at the time. One was in a terrorism class in a neighboring city, so we had 1 battalion covering the whole city. The fire chief, because of the San Bernardino City bankruptcy, was in a meeting with City Hall to deal with the bankruptcy stuff. We had an EMS coordinator that was on. We had 1 engineer on light duty helping with the EMS coordinator with an actual MCI pack. And we had 1 SWAT medic, myself, and then 2 battalion chiefs came in later into the incident a couple hours later. I was embedded. That day was SWAT training, so I was embedded in the SWAT team. We had regular training that day, and we decided to change it because of the recent terror attacks to active shooter training. So we were actively training on active shooter when this call came in, and we responded. We were geared up with our comms. The only thing we had to switch out was our simunition uppers for our regular M4 rifles, and we responded. Here's the way we laid it out, the staging, and we'll answer more questions as you can see the incident, the casualty collection point, the secondary. Once we find out about the improvised device, we moved it away farther, the tactical command post, and then the shootout. If you focus here on just north of the incident, just above the black basically stop sign there that you can see, you'll see here in a second that the suspects actually came in within 100 feet of us multiple times, driving around in their black SUV. So we set up a casualty collection point, which you can see to the right dot. Myself, I was inside. I was responsible for triaging over 40 people. I was one of the first officers to the door. Our ETA was about 9 miles, and it was a 22-minute ETA per Google, and we got there in 9 minutes from our training site where we were at. Responded to the doors as a tactical medic, as a police officer, trying to find a threat, trying to eliminate the threat. Once we knew we had the first floor cleared, then I transitioned into a paramedic and started triaging and treating the 40 victims that we had. You can see where the treatment area is set up, and we'll talk about this and how key and pivotal how close and en route to the hospital the triage area was that we set up. And then transition to Carly. And I'll answer more questions at the end of this. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carly Cruz, and I'm an emergency nurse by trade and got into the fire department about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now. I was the EMS coordinator on scene with the fire department. I rode down with the 3rd engine to arrive on scene that day when I heard everything with the chaos that was going on. And I ran with everybody else the MCI area and then also took over in the command post after all patients were off scene. So MedCom was very important. He was 4 months on the job. He was brand new paramedic with us, brand new firefighter. And he was the first engine that arrived on scene and staged. And immediately, him and the engineer started monitoring the police frequencies over the radio and decided that we have a big scene here. We have a lot of patients that we're going to need to triage and treat and transport. And so they started making calls to our 2 trauma centers, which are within a mile, mile and a half from the scene, and gave them a heads up. This was implemental because it provided an extra 20 minutes for them to get prepared, set up their triage area, set up their trauma teams, get all that ready, and the surgeons, and just be ready for what was incoming. After that, he contacted what is called our communications center and informed them of what was going on as well. And they declared it what's called the MCI declaration and notified all the other hospitals over a program called ReadyNet. This program sends out a page to all the hospitals informing them of what we have and a potential number of patients that are going to be there. And from there, they can respond back saying we can receive this many minors, delays, and immediates, and then our MedCom can make the decisions on where each patient go, alternating between each site so that we're not inundating a hospital. We put this picture up again because, like Ryan said, this is a very important picture to show how we set things up. It has been questioned many times if we put the MCI area in the right area, if we were too close when we found the IED, if we would have been in a blast zone, if there was a shooter left in the building, if we would have been in a line of sight for a shooter to target us as well. But this was a great place for us. You can't see the whole picture here, but imagine it as just a big loop. So this is the south side where the triage and treatment area is, and our hospitals are to the south. Both of our trauma centers are to the south, like I said, a mile, mile and a half down the freeway. So this allowed for us to contain that area and contain the patients and try and control the environment without losing patients as they are coming to us from the casualty collection point. As Ryan said, they were put in back of vehicles, in the back of beds of trucks, and then brought to us. We did lose one patient, unfortunately. Probation officer got a little excited and, as Brian puts it, was very tunnel visioned and just drove right past 10 of our fire trucks, right past 15 ambulances, and drove straight on to the hospital. Patient survived, patient is doing well, and so we'll just count that as that. There are a couple charts that I put together. I spent weeks going over data. Patient tracking is impossible in this type of incident. You have patients running in all different aspects, victims, bystanders. It's so impossible to keep track of them and know where they are. So this data is from the initial incident and what we were able to do in the tracking. We had a total of 36 victims that were triaged. 3 of those were orthopedic. These patients had been running from the scene and had fell. We had one degloving that actually took herself to the hospital even before we arrived on scene. And then we had another patient who went through the process. We saw her. She denied any injuries. And 36 hours later, she presented at a hospital with injuries to the right side of her chest and had bullet fragments in the right side of her chest. My hero, hands down. From those 36 that were triaged, 22 were treated and 21 were transported. This one shows the modes of transportation. We had 22 go by ambulance. 2 went by air rescue to a trauma center that was just south of us and out of our county. 1 was the police vehicle. That was the one I explained earlier. And then the 3 that walked in on their own. I know this chart is a little busy, but my main thing is kind of looking at what everyone was triaged, their priority levels, what every acuity was of the patient, and then their disposition. That disposition helps us, gives us that faith that everyone that was viable on scene was saved and is still with us at this time. Every patient was discharged within a matter of weeks. This last chart was looking at the severity. We wanted to get a look for what type of patients did we have, what type of injuries, what was the severity of those. So 14 were deceased on scene. We had 11 that were critical and required emergency surgery right away. Of those 5 more, were complex. These were the patients that had gunshot wounds, but they had some sort of fracture or neurodeficits. We had 4 that were just gunshot wounds that just needed assistance in the ER and were discharged, and then 8 orthopedics. Now that number is a little bit higher, and this number comes from both incidents. We had 2 separate scenes. We had the initial shooting scene, and then when we had the shootout, there were a couple TCs that occurred during that process. And so we had patients that had minor injuries, were treated, transported to the hospital, and discharged that evening. So looking at some of our lessons learned, and I'm just going to kind of go over a few of these. The main things that we see that we learned from this incident and looking at other incidents in the past through our history books is setting up that unified command immediately. That has to be done. We've talked about having your 2 ICs from fire and police standing side by side. They need to be attached at the hips so that they know exactly what's going on. They're making decisions together at all times. Interoperability to communication as well. This needs to be that combined. We had the privilege of both of our fire and EMS and our PD being on the same floor for dispatch. So that really helped us with that. Also, if you have those 2 ICs and other people connected, the radio communication that's going on scene is very, very important to keep that controlled. Setting up the triage and treatment immediately to control those POVs. We were set up within 15 minutes of notification when we were cleared in and ready to go. And we stood there for a couple minutes waiting for the first patient to arrive. Predetermined assignments. One of the big key, I can't push this enough, one of those key aspects of what happened. So we were driving down to the scene, or some of them were staging that were closer, and our IC, who was one of our battalion chiefs, started designating, you're going to be triage unit leader, you're going to be treatment unit leader, you're going to be medcom, and so gave us a couple minutes to wrap our brains around that aspect of what is our role, what is our responsibility, and then we were able to get to work right there instead of coming on scene and then going, well, what am I going to do? Setting up triage and treatment as close as possible. We learned this from some training. They had set it up miles away, mile away, on the other side of the incident, but having it right there allowed us to control that environment. So you want to definitely be in a safe zone, but when our situation, we found out that they had fled the scene, there really wasn't any safe place for us to set up. We had our force protection around us, the perimeter control, and we trusted that process. Using apparatus as well, that's one thing that we really did use. As you guys know, law enforcement and fire are a little different on how they're going to arrive on scene. So fire is very, very, very disciplined, and we arrived and we lined up our engines on the outside of the scene. What we could have done, and what I suggest when you start developing your programs, is to line those up in a way that you are protecting both the safety of the providers and the victims that are there, and also their privacy from media. So if we would have just done a little V around that area, we would have had a lot more privacy and a lot more security. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George Gomez. I am the EMS Deputy Chief for Dallas Fire Rescue. I've been on the department for almost 24 years, rode an ambulance, a frontline ambulance, for 13 of those years, and promoted and was a paramedic officer, and just rose through the ranks and ended up the Deputy Chief over EMS. On July 7th, all I can say is that, we were in the process. I was part of our active shooter policy, writing our policy and putting that in place. And you come up with all these ideas of how you think something like this is going to happen. And, all I can say is, I think Mike Tyson said it best, everyone comes with a plan until you get punched in the face. And then you start scrambling. And that's what happened. Never in my wildest dreams did I think we were going to have to try to save our own. And, you saw what happened with San Bernardino and the area that was covered, and then with Orlando and stuff, and not knowing that a month later, here it is in Dallas, and now we're trying to save our own. But it happened July 7th, 2016, came in at 20:58. It was an A shift. We've had marches. Protests before. We've had a lot of them, nothing unusual. A lot of times DPD will contact us and just say, hey, we've got a march going on, no big deal. If we need you, we'll call you. And that evening, we had about 800 people gather in protest of the recent police shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana. When it was all said and done with, we had 12 police officers shot and 2 civilians. 5 of the officers were fatally wounded by the lone gunman. The gunman ended up barricading himself at El Centro College downtown, and then later on the decision was made, after many threats, that he had placed bombs strategically throughout the downtown area, and he had planned to detonate them, and kept taunting our police officers, saying he's going to kill more. The decision was made to eliminate him by detonation. And when it's all said and done, this turned out to be the deadliest attack on law enforcement since 9/11. The response from Dallas Fire Rescue, we ended up having 10 rescues, which are they're ambulances. We had 5 engines, 4 trucks. We had 3 EMS field supervisors. We had a battalion chief, a section chief, EMS section chief, a deputy chief, and then we stood up our emergency operations center. Again, this started out, if you can see, this is the downtown area. If you look where it says Below Garden, it originally started out as a stationary protest. And after protesting what we thought that it was over, the protesters decided to march. So as you can see, they headed down Main Street, or towards Main Street Garden. Once they got there, they kind of made a circle, came back, marched down Elm, past El Centro towards Dealey Plaza, and then came up Commerce, and then that's when the shooting started. Lessons learned for us is communication with law enforcement. We have to establish those relationships, and we've done before tabletops, but when I say together, when I say establish relationships, you really get to know the people you're working with, really get to know those chief officers, and create a relationship. That way, when something like this happens, there's no questioning or anything. full trust with each other and working through the problem. You know, you have to recognize, considering the situation, that DPD, or for us, Dallas Police, they actually transported their own. We did transport some, but they did in the initial shooting, they transported their own, and that's going to happen. You got to understand our EMS, they're at risk. One of the things when we were putting this active shooter policy together, you know, we're coming up with this rescue task force, this extraction team. The rescue task force goes into the warm zone, and this is something foreign for our firefighters. You know, we had a couple of them, not all of them, we had a couple of them say that, hey, I didn't sign up to do something like this, and we did get some pushback. But we pushed through that, we pushed the policy through, and that's what that's our policy, and that's what we're moving with. But what I can tell you is when I put this policy together, you know, I did it in a fashion that I think the way I would have reacted if I was faced with the same situation is that you go in there to save lives, no matter the cost. And that night, I couldn't be more proud of our paramedics. They were in the hot zone looking for downed officers and trying to save them. Another lesson learned is you have to support your troops. An incident like this is very tragic, and you have to be out there and you have to support your troops. You have to be seen. You have to make contact with them as soon as possible. Even if you don't have any, you know, words of wisdom, but sitting there and listening to them tell you what they went through, what they saw, and then telling them and reinforcing that you're proud of them, what they did, it speaks volumes to your troops, and it, you know, shows you care for them. And then prepare for the aftermath. I can't tell you, with Twitter, Facebook, and the heightened awareness, you know, it just is really crazy, and it will wear you down, because it's something you can go out and talk to your troops, but Twitter, Facebook, the media, they're there 24/7, and they're watching all this. So you're competing against that. And that's one of the lessons I learned from the Ebola incident. As much as you'd go out there and support your troops, they're still watching all of this, the news, the media, they're watching Twitter. People are showing nonsense of what people are posting. And it really gets our firefighters, paramedics on edge. So those were the lessons learned. And just a couple of pictures. And these are the 5 officers that fell that day.
Good afternoon. I'd like to say thank you to the distinguished panel for their presentation. 5 minutes is quick. Be honest with you, it's very quick, especially for what transpired and everybody up here. But I would tell you this: I did not bring my slide because I wanted to make sure I speak to you directly on this. June 12, 2016, the Pulse incident was the largest shooting in U.S. history, and it occurred right there in Central Florida. We never thought it would ever happen, but it did. And today I just want to give you a quick overview of how we prepared ourselves and what we went through during that incident. My name is Roderick Williams. I'm the fire chief of the City of Orlando. Been there 22 years, going on 22 years this year. And this scene has forever changed my life, and also changed the life of some of my members that's in attendance today. But just real quick, June 12th, it happened at 2 o'clock in the morning. The assailant came into the club. As you know, it was approximately about 300 patrons in the club having a good time, and he opened fire. And from that point, as you all heard in news reports, we have a fire station less than 100 yards away, about 150 yards away from the club, and just less than a quarter mile away from there is a level 1 trauma center. So if we had a silver line in that whole thing, was the close proximity from the fire station and the club. So as the event unfolded, shots began to fire. The first arriving crew was sitting right here to my right, which is Rescue 7. They was coming down the road when the shots were being fired, and the lieutenant was calling the shots in. They made the first encounter to the patients with OPD, and then that's when everything began to to evolve on the scene. We had approximately 70 units there, 70 personnel between law enforcement and between fire and police. You had hundreds. You had an extreme amount of people panicking, blood. It was a war zone, if you can picture that. And we had to set up mass units, triage units in close proximity to the club. So as the event unfolded, we talked a lot what transpired in San Bernardino, Dallas. But one thing I would tell everybody, when you think about the Pulse nightclub, you got to think about it. It happened in 3 phases. And you look at the city of Orlando, we have accreditation, we ISO, we have EMAP, you name, we are from top to bottom, one of the top 1% of the fire departments, with all the accreditation and all the training. But what happened that night, it tested all of our resources and also our intellect as an organization to see how we can galvanize our troop, galvanize the community, and mitigate this threat and this problem we had. And we did that, and did exceptionally well, because I think. So one of the things that we lesson learned from that is that you always have to think about the crews. You have to think about the safety of those individuals that's working on the scene, as Chief alluded to. Giving them praise, giving them acknowledgement for what they've done, it goes a long way. We had issues with communication from Unified Command versus, and I talked about it earlier this morning, but Unified Command with law enforcement versus fire. That is paramount in any scene of this magnitude. You got to be able to communicate with your law enforcement brothers and sisters in that world. You have to be able to talk to them about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So some of the things that we took from that, and not to belabor the point, is communication was paramount, but our crews did a phenomenal job dealing with 300 patients coming through the streets at 2 o'clock in the morning. We had a level 1 trauma center that actually seen 44 of those patients. We transported, Rescue 7 transported about 13 patients themselves. OPD, we had law enforcement transporting about 15 patients, but actually what it did, it brought the community together. It brought law enforcement, hospitals, and everybody together to help treat all these victims. So one thing I just leave you with that as we go forward, that it was a unique scene, a scene that you haven't seen before, but it did go from an active shooter to a hostage situation to an EOD response within minutes. So as you think about ballistic vests, you think of all the training that you did, our personnel was thinking active shooter, but it quickly went to a hostage situation. So now your mindset went totally changed. And then it went to an EOD response. We had reports of weapons and explosive devices in the vehicle around the club as well as inside the club. So it changed our tactic consideration for the commanders. And then, again, we did our best that we could, and they did an excellent job. So as we go through this panel discussion, some of the things we talk about, it was an evolving scene that all 3 things came at us one time within minutes. So, but our personnel did a phenomenal job, and I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you all. So Boundtree did a survey recently, a survey of EMS providers, and they asked a lot of questions about MCIs and how prepared people were to respond to them. And and we're going to go over some of these statistics just because they're interesting and they might prompt discussion with our panel here. One of the first ones is, what is the likelihood of an MCI occurring near you? 14.52% extremely likely, 25% very likely, 37% somewhat likely, 23% not very likely. Nobody said never, because never say never, but I found this particularly interesting, especially in light of whether or not agencies actually have MCI protocols. 74% say they do, 20% no, and 7% of respondents say that they didn't know. So it's interesting that while people seem to have protocols in place, the likelihood of not very likely and somewhat likely are pretty low. And I was wondering if the panel could speak to that and talk about kind of their own impressions before these incidents happened, and maybe how having one occur so close and so recently has changed their perspective.
I can go ahead and start speaking to that. Can you hear me from here? All right. Is that better? There we go.
Yeah, perfect.
So I was one of those people. We were planning an MCI drill. It was a multi-company with many agencies surrounding us. And when we started talking about what we wanted to do for the MCI drill, I said, we are going to do ICS, start triage. That's what we need to do. And we need to focus on something that's real. So we went over different scenarios. I said, leave hazmat out, leave active shooter out. It's not going to happen here. We're not going to be a victim of that. Let's do bus incident. Bus into a vehicle. Lo and behold, a month later, I'm sitting in a terrorist attack that was an active shooter, a mass shooting, and a terrorist attack. It took about a week before for me to start realizing that, oh, maybe it could happen. I was sitting in a meeting with a couple other colleagues, and we got on a conversation on what was in the news right now, what was popular out there that had spiked my interest. And my answer was the Paris attacks. Said they happened just a couple weeks ago. They are very possible to happen here. They're an ally of us. If they're going to attack there, the U.S. is definitely a target next. Don't know when, don't know where, but it's going to come. 7 days, 3 hours later, I'm on scene of a terrorist attack in my own city. So that is one thing that we push and push and push. Please don't be that person that thinks it's not going to happen to you. If you look at the mass shootings, the top mass shootings in the history from 1984, you will see that they are in so different locations, different profiles, different suspects, different victims, different time frames. There is no profile. There is no one place it's going to happen and one place it's not. So please, please, please train, 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 train. I cannot say that enough. You absolutely cannot be naive and think that it's not going to happen. You have to accept the fact that it will.
Just to add to that, since 2000, between 2000 and 2013, it's been 160 shooting type incidents, about 11.4 a year. So if you think it won't happen, it will happen. And it's been occurring according to the FBI, and of which you had over 1,000 something casualties, be it death or be it just injured. So as you look at our community response from the Pulse incident, we've learned that we have to equip our firefighters and first responders to be ready to respond to the scenes accordingly, give them the best training, give them the best equipment. And even though we've been training since 2000, since the Columbine, we all put some emphasis on training. We put a great emphasis since the Pulse incident, because it can happen. But not only that, just scenes of violence in general. So we want to equip our firefighters with we purchase ballistic vests for all our seats on our apparatus on our department. So every seat, you come on the scene of violence or anything in the future, you at least have a ballistic vest. And before the vest was issued, we gave them 2 days of intensive training, 16 hours of training, if I'm not mistaken, 16 hours of training that each firefighter, as well as chief officers, went through the training to see exactly how to combat, and those things can happen. So we're not as naive as we once were. It does happen, it will occur. So we just want to make sure we're equipped, but also just educating your community. If you got to be able to get your community involvement. We launch hands-on CPR. We launch tourniquet programs to get our citizens to help to respond. When seconds counts, minutes counts, we need that community response as well, not just our first responders. So our goal is to educate and train and equip our firefighters as well as our citizens that we serve. So that's one of the things that we've done since. Some of the things.
To add to that really quick, there is a website called shootertracker.com that you guys can check out, and they do track every mass shooting. The number is actually up to 382 incidents in 2016. So 160 in a 13-year time and a 382 in 1 year.
Just want to say for Dallas, we are conducting active shooter training, and it's 3 phases for us, where we initially just completed our first phase, where we are getting our paramedics and our firefighters acclimated to the actual policy and procedures. The next phase is where they're actually using the ballistics that we bought and provided for them. And then the third phase is where we're actually going to be working with DPD, which will be this summer, working in coordination with them. But, just like what everyone up here said, this is real. It's here. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
One of the other questions that Boundary asked was about interagency MCI protocols and whether or not those are in place. About 69% said yes, 18% no, and 13% didn't know. And I think Chief Williams, you touched on it a little bit in that you had done maybe tabletop exercises. That was either you or Chief Gamez, but never had actually, done kind of interagency training. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, I would say we have done, since 2009, we had a shooting, a gateway shooting. It happened where a disgruntled employee came into the office building, killed 1 and injured 5. Since that training in 2009, we conducted joint response training with our joint response agencies as well as law enforcement, our brothers and sisters in law enforcement. But what we've done since the Pulse incident was that we realized that it was a drop-off or a disconnect somewhat from the command staff. So we put a great emphasis on tabletop exercises to help educate our commanders when they come on scene to know exactly their role. Because we had, like any other place, attrition, people retire out. So a lot of time that experience goes out the window with them, and was it really passed on? So we took somewhat for granted it was being passed on the right way. So I put a greater emphasis along with my command staff, administration from EMS, to make sure we train and equip our managers. Because the troops in the field know what to do. I mean, one thing about they will respond, they know how to treat, but it was, from what we learned from the Pulse, it was a disconnect somewhat, if you will, from the command staff and that unified command. So we put a great emphasis lately on just educating our command officers to see exactly what the field is doing and get a good feel, just a better feel of what they're doing. So we put a great emphasis on that.
Okay, I'm going to actually skip this slide, but go to the next one and talk about some of the products that are in use in EMS agencies, fire and EMS agencies, from the respondents of the survey. You can see tourniquets are common, trauma dressing obviously common, NPAs are obviously common, but less so hemostatic dressings, chest seals, even decompression needles. The other 6.43% was made up of things such as tactical crite kits, blood products, options to take a tactical course or training from police, and as well as specific shooting and stabbing bags or kits. In this case, this respondent said they had 2 per ambulance. So I was wondering what, if any, changes have occurred within your own agencies regarding preparation for EMS and fire to actually respond and respond quickly to these types of incidents.
I'll touch on this a little bit. I think as an EMS agency and fire agencies, we've really hit on the rescue task force. We've hit on responding to this to stop the bleeding, the Hartford consensus stuff, and we've really pushed this hard, and everybody's equipped with tourniquets. We know what to do. But the question is, are we going to be the first on scene to be able to apply this tourniquet? An arterial bleed goes out in 1 to 3 minutes. We know that. So the Boston bombing, who was there? Civilians. That's who we need to be focusing on training, is our community. We need to have these packs in malls. We need to have these packs in county facilities, large facilities where they're going to be having. I know in California they have passed a law that they will, new buildings built after 2018, they will start to see these. But we need to get out there and educate our community how to apply a tourniquet, how to apply a wound dressing, because they're going to be the first line of defense to stop what occurs. Also the officers. The officers in these situations, it's their scene. They're in charge of the scene. It's their job. Everybody focuses on EMS because people are hurt inside, but it's not our scene. It's a crime scene. It's their job to clear us in, to get us to be able to do our job. So whether they effectively bring the patients out to us or we do a rescue task force in certain situations, that will apply, but you got to remember the time frame of that. Most of these victims are on and off scene because law enforcement wants to rescue. You hear a common thing between all these incidents: law enforcement rescued, Aurora, Colorado, San Bernardino. All these incidents are happening because it's so chaotic. We're public servants. We are going to do the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, and we're going to do what we think is right by helping people. Somebody says help, reaches out for you. What are we going to do? We're going to bend down and we're going to help them. So how do we combat that? That's what we need to focus in on, is also law enforcement. Law enforcement and rescue. We became fire, EMS, and rescue. That's where I see the wave of the future, is integrating police officers, because this is their scene. They're able to protect themselves. They can drag them out to the casualty collection point, and then we work together from there. And I think training these officers on basic tourniquets, and a lot of the officers carry Narcan now. A lot of carry the needle tees. Training these officers to be able to do that, to bring them out to us where we can further treat them. I think that's the way of the future.
For Dallas, we do have all of our rescues, our ambulances have tourniquets. Actually, our DPD, all of our officers, Dallas police officers, have tourniquets. And we have the Stop the Bleeding kits placed in strategic locations through all of our city facilities. But again, I think it's education, getting the community involved, just like CPRs. You know, they're going to be the first ones there. They're going to be, you know, they will have a big impact on what they do or do not do and the survivability of someone. So I think it's education, getting the community involved.
Boundtree also asked about personal protection products, specifically for active shooter incidents, and the responses were very interesting, actually. Their ballistic vests, 16%, helmets, 25%, IFACs, 25%, and other 55.71%. The other usually consisted of hazmat, biohazard type things, as well as, you know, the usual gloves, et cetera. But there were some interesting responses, and one of them was cannot secure funding to purchase tactical PPE, and that came up multiple times, as well as if you want armor, you supply it yourself, or something to that effect, and that came up multiple times as well. And I'm wondering if you all can speak to PPE specifically for EMS and fire, and if there's been any changes or your thoughts on
that. Prior to our incident with them, when we were San Bernardino City Fire, because of the bankruptcy, our fire department, 137-year history, got transferred over to the county fire department. It wasn't a bad thing. It was a good thing for our agency, just due to the bankruptcy and the lack of resources and funding. We didn't have ballistic equipment, but we train that way. All of our officers, through the post mandates now, they have contact team, contact team, contact team, trying to eliminate the threat. A police officer's whole goal and responsibility is to eliminate the threat. If we eliminate the threat, we stop further life loss. So their whole thing is contact team, and then they send in rescue teams. So the law enforcement's actually recognizing that, hey, we need to also start rescuing these victims, because not only do we have this threat, we also have the threat of them with these wounds. We need to get them out to the proper EMS personnel. So with the rescue task force, we didn't have that in place with city. Now with the county department, we have it throughout our whole county. So we train on specific incidents, school shootings, large buildings, where we're going to implement rescue task force, not on every single incident. But what we found is there's a lot of agencies that they buy the ballistic vests, but what rating are they? Are they level 2? Are they level 3? Are they level 4? What type of round can they actually stop? A lot of the cheaper vests that you can purchase will only stop a handgun round. All these incidents that we see are assault weapons. Do you have a level 3 plate carrier? Do you have a level 4 plate carrier that'll stop a .308 round? We had the Dorner incident in our town where he was running around killing officers for a 7-8 day period. He was using a .308 round. So are we properly equipping our guys, or are we giving them a false sense of security also because we want to save a little money? So now you have a level 3 that'll only stop a handgun round. Now the guy, every incident we've seen, is a rifle round. So now that bullet's going to just slow down, and now it's going to tumble through your body. So that's things we need to think about as well, is are we properly equipping when we do purchase these vests? I think any type of equipment you can have is great. If we can afford it, we can purchase it, it's great. But let's make sure we get the right equipment.
Right. Just to add Just to add to that, I agree we get by the right equipment. But what we did, we became a partnership with our local law enforcement office, OPD, just to see what they're wearing, how can we purchase something similar, if not the same equipment. So me as a fire chief, I made a decision that we tried grant funding, which we got some grant funding, but also I took money out of the budget just to say how important is it to me. It's important to me to make sure my personnel is protected to the best of our ability. So for me, it's only the right decision to make sure you go home safely, you work safely. So only way we can do this is spend the money on the protective equipment, no different from the gloves. If we're going to a society that's based on, if the society is going this way, so we need to make sure we equip and I train our personnel, but definitely having a good relationship with law enforcement, what they're wearing, and we've been in training extensively for the last, since post incident, with our law enforcement brothers and sisters, just to make sure we're on the same page. And that starts with communication and equipment, and then training. And they've been at our training sessions with us over the last couple of months, so it's been a good partnership. But like anybody with a budget, you have to put what's priority. And so if you want your personnel safe, you spend the money on it. and then you can worry about some things they're going to pay for. You're always going to pay for EMS equipment, drugs, if you will, vehicle, fuel. That's basic. That will be paid regardless. So if you want your personnel safe, spend the money on equipment. That's what I would say.
I'm going to skip that next slide too, but I want to get to this one. To be better prepared, what would help your organization be better prepared for an MCI or other high-threat situation? And I think the largest response was additional training. 93% of respondents, 73% talked about additional supplies, and 63% increased interagency cooperation. Some of the other responses, which were 8%, included funding, training, but for the community, personnel and staffing, as well as the ballistic vests and other PPEs that we discussed. And I think one of you mentioned something about getting the community involved, and I was wondering what are your perspectives on how to best do that? What would your advice be, as well as how strongly do you really think that is going to be effective and can be effective?
Training is the most important thing. Hands down, training. It's I refer to a lot of stuff as sports. I played collegiate baseball. Game plan. You never go into a game without a game plan. Can you imagine at Super Bowl they're asking football coach, hey, what's your game plan? I don't know. Let's see what happens. Why would we do that in EMS as well? Training. I really believe the community is the biggest thing, where we get the community involved. We start doing training with the community. But as the chief spoke on it multiple times, it's this interoperability with the police and fire departments. You got to get guys talking. With the rescue task force, the greatest thing that does, whether it's right, wrong, or anything, it gets everybody communicating and talking and understanding the capabilities of each agency and what they can do. Once you open up that communication, it's now not just a person, it's a face, it's a name. You talk to them, find out, interrelations with them. We know each other because we're brothers and sisters, because we know what's going on with their family. You know when somebody's hurt, well, the cops have that same relationship. The more that we can bridge that gap and have that, we're going to have that sense of family with them, as well as we're one department and not two separate departments. And that just comes from training. Like he said, tabletop exercises, getting that command staff, the interoperability, the unified command. Every successful incident that you see, the unified command was set up. All the ones that weren't, you're behind the power curve because you don't have a game plan, because unified command wasn't set up.
Okay, I think it's a good time to go into questions at this point. If anybody here has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, ask anything you'd like, and we can bring a mic over to you as well. So, all right, over here. We're getting the mic over to you.
For each of your agencies, did you guys have a pre-established dispatch created for active shooter incidents?
Yeah, like anything else, we have dispatch protocols. If it's an active shooter, it's a drowning, whatever it is, we do have certain protocols. But again, we rely heavily on those commanders to use that fire ground hunch and the instincts to make sure they're putting people in the right spot. But we do have certain protocols that mass shooting, but not specifically just the active shooter. We do not have that.
Same for San Bernardino City Fire Department. We use EMD for our dispatch, and so they have MCI type situations, but not specific on active shooter at the time.
Okay, next question over here.
I was just curious how many of you had done a drill with the hospital, just kind of collaborating on like a mock MCI when the last one had been.
I didn't say it, but without the hospital support and that community, we wouldn't have been successful as we are. But we've drilled the hospital at least once a year in a big major, some type of level 1 trauma hospital. We come together with the multiple agencies and we either do an airplane crash or some type of mass casualty training once a year. So we've been doing that for the last, I can say, at least 10 years with the hospital. It could have probably been longer than that, but at least 10 years. So we have great partnership with the hospitals in at least Central Florida.
I would second that in San Bernardino County. We have done those multi-agency drills that I was talking about and involved the hospitals in that. A lot of times they're on scene with us so that we have that communication right there, but sometimes we'll just go ahead and use them through ReadyNet, through Comm Center, have them contact them through ReadyNet and then do drills. Also, Comm Center sends out a drill every single morning to the hospitals, so they're very aware of how to use the system, how effective it is. On our situation, like I said, we made those phone calls first because we didn't know how quickly. It was actually 11 minutes from the time we called them and alerted the hospitals until it went out on ReadyNet. So it gave them a lot more notice by us just picking up the phone call and saying, hey, this is what's going on, get ready and expect some patients to be coming in.
All right, I think we have an online question.
Is it for your service, sorry, I'll start over. How hard was it for your service to integrate with your police?
Are you talking about Unified Command?
Unified Command? That's what I think, same thing.
Is that what it means for Unified Command?
Am I on? How hard was it for you to integrate with your police department?
I'm assuming from a unified
Yeah.
command, like on the scene, from the scene.
Probably, yeah.
Oh yeah, no. Again, these incidents, you got to have a relationship before the incident even occurred. So we had to establish a relationship with our local law enforcement officers. So when the scene occurred, it was a commonplace, if you will. But we learned since from that scene that we still have a lot more training to do, and we have done more since then. But relationships started before the actual any incident. If you want to be truly successful, I would say.
Similar to in San Bernardino City, there's a lot of violence that occurs in that city, so the relationship is very close with them. We'd also done some training in 2013 on active shooter, and it was a 4-day training process between the fire department and law enforcement. And so they knew exactly what they needed to do and what was successful, and that helped with getting patients from the CCP over to the MCI area by utilizing beds of trucks and things that we found that was successful for us on those drills.
Now with the county, since San Bernardino City's come over, we do actually 1 to 2 trainings a month because our county's so large. We represent 6 or 7 different cities. The county's the biggest county in the nation. So we go, I mean, I forget 20 million square, or how big it is.
20,000 square feet.
I mean, square mile. Square feet.
You know, square feet, whatever, the size of the
So we
square.
do this on a regular basis. We have an active shooter cadre, and we train with the officers all the time. Where we found that the lack is those from the administration. Not that they lack that they don't want to do it, but a lot of this training, we do it on the lower level, and we found that the interoperability, we need to work with that upper management to do the desktops and have them, because they're the ones that's setting up. I mean, you can have the greatest team in the world, but you don't have a good coach. The analogies, sports analogies again, I'll revert back to them, but yes. You need that upper management.
All right, I think we have another online question.
So along those same lines, what do you do when your local law enforcement is reluctant to establish interagency protocols?
That's a good question.
That's a good question, but it starts at the top. It starts with the chiefs, the commissioners, the mayor, whoever you work for, having those honest executive conversations about how we work together as a community. It's one community. It's not just for the fire department community or law enforcement community. It's one community, and we owe it to our citizens to work together. So this conversation has to start at the highest level and work its way down and work its way back up. It's a continuous pipeline of conversation, top-down, bottom-up conversation. But it definitely starts at the top. Got to have the chiefs and the managers on the same page.
One more from our online audience. What can we do to get our communities to engage in preparing for active shooter incidents? For example, stocking our schools, etc., with Stop the Bleeding kits.
Well, in the state of California, they just passed a law saying that all high school students will have to complete a hands-only CPR course before they are able to graduate. So I think starting there, starting with our kids and get training going with training. You can do Stop the Bleed in schools as well to teach them how to start doing that with the community. CERT teams are very, very important. Encouraging CERT teams in your community and being very active with them. We do training at least once a month with our CERT teams throughout our whole entire county, and they're very, very active and very participatory. But it's all about starting from the bottom and getting the kids involved and then moving up from there.
Great. Do we have any more questions in the audience here? All right, over there. I'll get the mic to you.
With the online ability to broadcast the feeds of your radio traffic, did that impose any problems with your guys' triage, with your treatment plans, transport, et cetera?
That's a great question. Since then, some of our TAC channels and PD response channels, it was already in the process before this, but they're encrypted now. And that's just for the safety of the officers, because we want to be one step ahead versus there's so much social media now that you can broadcast everything that's happening. And they know, and then their family members are calling in because they're watching the thing, say, hey, they're moving up to the door, doing whatever. So now it puts the officers behind the power curve. So a lot of the channels are encrypted. With this incident, it happened so quick. There was so much radio traffic that there was nothing that you could have really done or changed. I don't think it inhibited the response of what we did. It was hard to communicate because there's so many people talking, and that's always an issue, but I don't think it inhibited us and prevented us from doing our job.
I agree with Ryan on the incident. We did not have an issue with that. We did run into some social media issues afterwards. We were receiving some threats on Twitter and things like that that we had to take to Homeland Security, and we had to lock down some of our stations for our safety because we didn't know if those were vetted or not and what to do with them. So social media definitely plays a good and bad role on emergency management. It can be very helpful to get the information out to the community and responders, but also it can be harmful and a little too much at times.
Yes, I agree. We ended up shutting it down for a few minutes or so, a few days or so after doing the pulse sensing, because it was getting bits and pieces of the information that was getting out that we did not want out. So we made a determination to shut it down for a while because it was just people listening to the Pulse app, or listen to what was transpiring. So we did end up shutting it down.
I think we have time for, yep, we have one more question over here.
Given that the country is populated with volunteer services, so with all your organizations being career staffing, if we turn the tables and have it a career aspect or a volunteer aspect, not all of our volunteers are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Have you, since your incidents, created any type of pre-planning response plans for your EMS providers specifically? You know, fire suppression has first engines do this, truck companies do this, first officers are doing this, they're hunting the guy down to take him out. But our EMS folks don't usually get that. They get triage and transport, but have you seen a need to have those pre-planned type responsibilities? You know, your initial triage transports go here, your RTF teams report here, and using your dispatchers to do that in a volunteer setting.
Just real quick for me, we are in discussions right now looking at protocols to see how that playing a role, but we are training our personnel to get them to think like that. Firefighters, we have SOP seat assignment for every seat on the department. So just taking that same philosophy and standard and add it to the EMS side. It is a paradigm shift, you know, getting us to make that switch, because we fight a lot of fire, I guess, all the time. So we have to switch people mindset. So we are working on it. It is a slow turn, but we are working on it.
I think you look at a lot of agencies and they have one active shooter policy, or rescue task force policy, I should state as well. But if you look at all these incidents, when is one incident the same? When you're responding, 60 to 70% of them per the FBI are workplace related. Only, I think, 12 to 13% are school related. Every single training we do, you see on the internet or that it's at a school event or a mall. Well, those are the lower frequency calls. So it's hard to have one policy for that. It's a start, it's a guideline, just like START triage. It's more of a guideline, but you can branch out. It gives you the foundation that you need to have, and I think that's where you start. You start with the foundations, the principles, because now you learn those foundations and principles just like in paramedic school or EMT school, nursing school. Now you branch out and you establish what works for your community. You look at your target hazards, and that's the responsibility of your company officers, is to get out and start looking at those target hazards. Where can we have an incident? Where would these terrorists attack? And we start pre-planning and getting ahead of them. And that's your own responsibility within your community and the community that you serve. It's very hard with the volunteer agencies, very, very hard, just because it is part-time. It's a battle.
Do we have any other questions? We've got time for one more. If anybody has anything burning? All right. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap it up. We're just about out of time anyway. So thank you again to all of our panelists for participating today, and as well as to our sponsor, Boundtree Medical, for their support in making this educational opportunity available to not only the audience here, but to everybody online. We really appreciate that. Don't forget that this presentation will be archived on gems.com/webcast within 48 hours, so you can share it with your colleagues. Thank you so much for attending our first ever EMS Today live panel simulcast. We hope to see you back to another GEMS webcast very, very soon. Thanks, everybody.